Hi YouTube, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're looking at the new Nvidia RTX 3070 graphics card. In particular the Founders Edition, which I managed to get hold of on release date. Now of course, prior to this there's been lots of videos out there already comparing this card to the 2080 Ti and saying how great its performance is. So this video is not specifically looking at just how great a card it is, but really looking at from a user's perspective in a real world setting, whether the 3070 is a value for money purchase if you're upgrading your system. Now it's a beautiful looking card. These obviously are some images from Nvidia themselves, but here's my card. A couple of grease marks on the box, excuse that. So a quick unboxing to see what's in the box. So here's the card. It's a really good looking piece of kit, really solidly built. Difficult to get out of the box. certainly well packaged. It's really quite heavy, and compared to the 2060 that I'm replacing in my system with this, it's a really hefty bit of kit. So as we just flip it over here, you'll see that the new 12-pin power connectors there, facing horizontally rather than vertically and not at an angle is with larger cards, but still looking really good. Also enclosed in the box, a couple of user guides, as well as the new 12-pin to 8-pin power connector, which we'll be using later. So, here it is, just going to plug it into my system. Now if you haven't seen the system before, I recommend you go out and check out my £1,000 PC build, which I'll leave in a link above. So I'm replacing that 2060 KO I had in this system with a new 3070. So that's an upgrade around $180 to $200 ish, depends on which particular 2060 you've got, and we'll look at my one specifically later. But it slots in quite nicely, looks quite tidy. I'm not quite sure, the cable, that's quite a big lump there. I think I'd rather have rid of it if I were honest. But you know, it's okay, and I'm sure in future you'll be able to get semi-modular power supplies with those connectors done there. So in terms of our test system then, just to remind you, it's a Ryzen 5 3600X. It has 16GB, 2x8 in dual channel, 36MHz CL16 memory, a 1GB NVMe drive, and really the power supply and case aren't really relevant for this. So then in terms of testing, let's have a look at where we are. So I've put in 4 games for this particular test. Forza Horizon 4 is our first game up. I've tested at lowest 1080p specs and the highest 1440p Ultra to give us a bit of a comparison between the two cards. So in this particular test you'll see the Ryzen 2060 and the 3070 are not far off in terms of 1080p, but at 1440p it's a massive difference, somewhere in the region of around 40%. Pretty impressive I think. Next up, CSGO. A 2060 and again the 3070 at low settings 1080p, pretty comparable, but again quite a massive increase, over 20% increase there with a 3070, really very impressive. And what you'll see as you go through these graphs is that effectively for all of them you're getting with 3070 the same performance of 1440p, you'll get a 1080p normal settings on the 2060. So here again, pretty comparable for 1080p, massive increase, almost 100%, or just over 100% actually, of GTA 5. Now of course this is the benchmark, it's never necessarily indicative of in-game settings because of all the black screens, but it's a good comparison. And then finally just for this Fortnite, because it's a bit of a must on any sort of setting, and again 1080p on both cards, pretty similar, and again on 1440p epic settings, I think somewhere in the region of 60%, so that's pretty impressive there. So what I've done then in terms of the comparison also, just come up with an average on frames per second of both settings. So again, for both cards, a bit of an increase, between 5 and 10% for 1080p settings between the two cards, but at 1440p, 40%, close on 50% really in terms of that average. It's a really big jump between the two cards. So then we're faced with, well great, we knew the 3070 was a great card, but is it a value upgrade for your system? So, performance of 1440p, let's have a look. In terms of frames per second increase, as we just saw, 147 for the 2060 as an average frame per second. For the 3070, 203 frames per second on average. And that's a just under 40%, so 38% increase in performance I saw of 1440p. So how does that stack up in terms of the price then? Well, the current retail price of a 2060 KO, which is the card I have. Just around $360 currently, which is quite a chunk of cash. You can get cheap 2060s, but I thought it'd be better just to compare the one I have. So that's $360. And the 3070, $500, £470 in the UK. Look at that, it's a price increase of 39%. So at 1440p, exactly square. You're paying every penny for extra performance. But of course what you're not getting in this comparison is a system price. So if you look at the price of an overall system, the increase in price to put the 3070 in there is actually only a 15% increase compared to the price of the original system, which gives you a much better comparison, I think. I think the system price is a much better guide for performance than a straightforward comparison of a card with a high-end processor. Look how many frames per second it has. In the real world, spending 15% more on your system will get you a 40% performance jump, and that's really impressive. So overall, what are my thoughts on this card? Well, so far I've not done much 4K testing, and that's the other thing to mention here. Obviously the 3070 is a 20 Ti comparator, is going to be really quite capable of full 4K gaming, where the 2060 is in theory capable, but in practice is very limited in terms of sort of 30 frames per second for most games. So I think that's another big plus for the 3070. So I think in terms of value for money, at that price point, if you can afford it, it's a great card. Compared to the new AMDs coming out, we'll have to see whether it's the best value for money choice. But I think certainly in terms of a performance jump, it's a good card. And I think in terms of value for money for $500 or £450 to £470, you're really not going to get much better performance at the moment. So it's definitely worth it if you're in the market for this sort of card. And in terms of that value for money question, be really interested in your thoughts. So as a final couple of thoughts, just to mention the processor. So another one of the reasons for testing this out is that whether the 3070 is a good fit for a 3600, a 6-core 12-thread processor, or in my case the 3600X, or even when it's released the 5600X. Certainly from my perspective on this testing, there were no real bottlenecks that this particular processor put in place. I think this 6-core 12-thread processor that are being released, the Zen 2 and Zen 3, and even the i5 10400s, are going to be perfectly suitable for a card like this. They're not going to bottleneck, and if they do, it's going to be to a very, very sort of small extent, not where you're going to lose massive frames per second, so I don't think you'll notice a performance drop. So I think certainly from that perspective, it's a very good matchup, and I'll be looking to get a 5600X as soon as they're out and put a new system together, probably with this card, and see what it looks like and do some real testing. Looking really at the 4K end of it, I think, to see what we can really push performance-wise, and some benchmarks in terms of Geekbench and Cinebench and that sort of thing as well, just to get a new system specification for some new components. So do consider subscribing. I'll have that out as soon as I get hold of that processor, and I think that'll be a really good build and a really good test. So thanks for watching. Hope you found that useful and enjoyable. Leave comments below on the system comparisons, the price comparisons, and what you might like to see me test with a new system with a 5600 and the 3070 combined. And until the next one, go well.